So, Brian, let's talk about things that we shouldn't be doing, or operational, operating a railroad, and some of the pitfalls of not only planning for operation, but future things that you may want to consider to avoid some of these pitfalls that we've all run into at some point or another in our model railroading experiences. Like we were just discussing, I've gone DCC, but I've had my layout actually completely shut down with the DCC system because of some little minor issue or not. And Brian here has a backup system so that if one system fails, he can go to another, and other than a few curse words, as he said, you can continue to operate. So
this goes to, why are you building this? Which, if you get back to that Gibbons and Druthers exercise that I mentioned probably more than once, that's purely is a druther. It's sort of a sliding scale. Are you a rail fan or are you an employee? Or somewhere along on that scale. The whole point is, of course, to establish the purpose of the layout.
Right.
In this case, this is a proto-ops platform. We have formal operating sessions. That's what it's for. It's not representative. It's not a slavish representative of a particular locale. Our sessions, it's about a 20-year span that might select an era for a particular session. So the purpose of this is very different from someone that, say, wants to turn around and model the town that they grew up in the year they graduated high school, or something like that. And there's some things that you have to think about in a proto-ops platform versus a layout where you are the rail fan or you're trying to recapture a moment in history.
Or just to watch trains run around because that's what you like to see.
Well, yeah. If you're, for instance, if you're a builder or a collector, continuous running, you're a rail fan. You just want to see your, what it is you've built or what it is you've collected moving past you. Which is a perfectly viable thing. I say, yeah. Even a loop around the cellar is a perfectly viable design choice.
Right.
But for instance, here, this is because this is operations oriented. You'll notice that to me the benchwork height is I think it's like 42 or something like that. It's not very high or high enough according to a lot of the pundits. But the thing is here, I can reach across 32 inches conveniently, which is my maximum depth. There is a pitfall for you. Don't build it so deep you can't reach across it.
Exactly. Yep.
Luckily, in N scale, you can reach across the Grand Canyon. In O scale, I can reach across the street. You got to think. You have to think in those terms. The lower it is, actually, the better your ability to reach over and do work.
Correct.
Especially in a yard. Having a maximum depth is just a good thing to have in your brain. Choosing a height that is more in tune for viewing, it should be higher.
Correct. Yep.
You got to ratio it with how tall your ceilings are. That's back to that thinking in 3 dimensions thing. But that's an important consideration. In this case, because it's a proto-ops platform, the one quality that I'm just an absolute bear about, and I think is the most important one for a proto-ops platform, is reliability.
Mm-hmm.
You want backups. You want, I chose not to go the DCC route, sort of. What I've done is a little different. But the thing is that the problem with DCC, at its current state of the art, it's not as reliable as well executed and well designed analog right now. Later on, totally different thing. Battery. Well,
I think that
that's a
might be the
choice.
future. It might be the future.
I think it's just going to be one control system choice of a bunch of control system choices that we have.
Right.
I don't think that one is going to dominate over the other, with the exception that I believe that DCC or some sort of command control probably will be the dominant control system, especially when you consider that generations much younger than us, their hobby is going to be, what can I make my technology do with this? How do I
Right.
translate my love of digital control to control something, especially something that's analog?
Right.
That's kind of where I see the hobby going. I don't see it dying. I've heard that it's going to die for as long as I've ever been in it, which is like 60 years. And it hasn't died yet. And I don't think it's going to myself, but it's going to continue to evolve. And for me, it might be unrecognizable, but not for the guy that right now is 20 or something like that. Go ahead and run, figure out how to run stuff with your phone. It's
Yeah.
what your hobby's about.
Right.
It's what this is supposed to be. It's supposed to be your hobby,
And fun.
And any of us old geezers say, "Oh, that's not," just, you know what you could tell them.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
1933 model railroader. I was telling Brian. I said I read that, and it's 33. He said the hobby's dying back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Almost 100 years later. Now, 90 years later.
When I was a kid, man, I got the whole lecture.
Yeah.
When we were kids, we built like plastic airplanes and stuff like that. It was a big deal then.
Yeah.
Right. Not very many people do that, other than this adults looking for nostalgia. And if you want to see some really good modeling, by the way, and learn something, go to the IPMS shows and see what these people build and how they do it, and bring those skills to your railroad.
Oh yeah.
Oh, listen, important stuff. But anyways, building in styrene. These old guys from before the war, that were old guys when I was 12, they were going, no, real modelers build in wood. Real modelers solder brass. Well, I do build in wood and I do solder brass, but I like plastic too. Real modelers don't use decals, they hand letter. I remember that one. Again, because reliability is a big deal, getting back on
Back on track.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we sort of wander off. But yeah, there's two complete control systems on this layout. So if something does go down, I can flip a switch, hand somebody a different throttle, and we can continue to march. And then I can always go and fix it later. One thing I have done, you'll notice, is that there is a wide variety of, I use NCE radio throttles. For this kind of an operation, radio throttles are a great thing. They give you a flexibility of movement that for a terminal operation is a requirement, really. And in this case, what we've done, rather than put decoders in the locomotives, is that there are decoders on the railroad. So what we've done, there's the regular radio receivers up there, radio throttles. Down underneath here, you'll see the boosters. So far, it's all, as you would expect it, until we get to here. When we get to the places where there are cab selection, and the railroad itself, by the way, is analog. But if you can look down there and see it, there's an 8 amp decoder. The motor outputs are what are tied to the railroad, as in the same manner as a regular DC power supply. The inputs are hardwired to the boosters, so I actually have no contact issues or anything like that. And at that point, then these things can run. They run this railroad as a DCC equipped railroad. They're not running locomotives as DCC equipped locomotives. The one thing that you got to be careful about is to make sure that you've got all your circuitry protected. The outputs of the decoders are 5 amps, where these are 8 amp decoders. So the boosters will protect the decoders.
8 amp decoder, yeah.
Yeah, the 5 amp boosters will switch off on a short before the 8 amp decoder sees it.
Right.
But that's what gives me radio throttles that actually have knobs,
Right.
instead of those ugly old crest things, which I despise. One of the things in an ops platform to watch out for is putting scenic things in the way of things. Like, you would think that this arrangement is going to have people knuckling, the water tower of this, because there's a crossover back here. But I have left room, and people will, people are careful. But you got to leave room to be able to go and work with whatever elements it is that you put in here. You just
Right.
got to be careful of that thing. Visually, here's one. Here's a pitfall, and I see this all the time. You look at the back scenes here. The one thing about the back scenes is that we went through great length. The back scene story is fun. It's the only part of this layout that I didn't build. Other than there's some buildings that friends of mine have built, or a locomotive or two that friends of mine have done. But this is, for the most part, my work, because I just, I like doing this. Except for the back scenes, because I'm not an artist. So a friend of mine, a guy named Lee Davis, is the artist. And we had to have long discussions because of how low the bench work is, and that thing that people forget, which is the horizon is never below eye level.
Right.
It never is. So this is how we established our horizons. And in this case, where is that thing? I know I've still got it here somewhere. I actually made, somewhere around here is there's the nifty horizon stick. I'm going to step out of the frame for just a second.
Okay.
Go look at things. I'll be right back. Here it is. Okay. So here we have, when we were actually painting this thing, I turned around and made this. And this loops onto, like that, so that you could make sure that the horizon never got below eye level.
That's pretty cool.
But you'll see that, and especially a lot people that shoot panoramas for backdrops, they're not paying attention to where that horizon is and where it falls. And, you get an aircraft and you can go way the hell up, and I'm sorry, it's still at eye level or down there to it. You just can't get away. You can't get out of it. You visually will have a real believability problem as soon as you see a place where you see blue down at your waist. It's just not going to.
It didn't come off right. Yep.
Another one. And if you see any, just let's sing out. Here's another one. If you're doing a proto-ops platform, and it's going to have multiple scenarios, that means you got to have a place to put all the stuff that isn't on the layout at the time. Now I have these nice low ceilings, which if I was to rigidly adhere to the pundits, I would have put a drop ceiling in, or at least covered over, and ruin the opportunity for me to have really handy and safe storage of rolling stock. Anything that's not on the layout is stored up in the floor joists. And it's much easier on it than taking it out of boxes, putting it back in, shoving boxes on, the pile of junk under the layout and that sort of stuff like that.
Right.
It just works out. It works out really well. Don't be too quick to cover this over when it actually is a fantastic source of
storage.
Lots and lots of safe storage.
Yeah. And then one thing that I mentioned to Brian just a few minutes ago, when I was here operating, I thought the lights in front of the layout were placed too far away from the front fascia, because it's hard to reach some of the car numbers on the tank cars or the freight cars. It was a little hard to do. And Brian explained to me that if he moves them out, he had them out towards the front, the operators were hitting their heads on it, for one thing.
In order to get those out far enough for you to see car numbers on this track here, for instance, you would actually have to put them out here.
Right.
And have and still, even on a tank car, because the tumble home is still above where the number is.
Yeah.
Even out here may not work very well.
Right.
If you, on the other hand, for instance, if you build a layout that's called valances,
Right.
you're still going to have that same problem, because lighting behind a valance is not going to turn around and illuminate this.
No, and
So-
even on my layout, I have a valance and I have a high enough ceiling, but even in spots, I still didn't have the valance out far enough in a couple of locations that even the front of the layout still shattered a little bit. So something to take into consideration when you're doing your planning. And actually, lighting on model railroads is just as important in a lot of the stuff that we do, because you need to be able to see what you're doing. You need to be able to see the switches in the proper. You need to be able to see to reach in and uncouple the cars. So lighting is a big consideration in what you're doing.
And not only is it a big consideration, but the style of lighting has to marry up with the style of the layout, or the purpose of the layout. We're going back to purpose again.
Right.
If you're showing a scene, and trains are supposed to be going through this scene, and this is all supposed to be as much of a replication of a piece of history as possible, if that's your gig, and you're going to choose then lighting that's got this color value or that color value, and the positioning of it to create the shadows in exactly the proper way and stuff like that. And that's all legitimate stuff. If you're doing a layout that's an ops platform, though, a lot of that you're going to have to, there's going to be some compromises. There's a lot of that sort of thing that you have to rethink, because you got to work with the stuff. I have to be able to get down there, in between there, and see my knuckles in order to turn around and do this. You just have to. You have to be able to work with the stuff, and again, that does define the height that I have, so that people can look down. It defines how I light this thing and where the lighting is, so they can see in between,
Right.
and do their work. It defines my aisle widths. People are working in both directions here. Think about this when you're doing aisle widths.
Yep.
Aisle widths is something that people really bugger up a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, most of us that are here and are my age,
We put on a few.
yeah, we've given up our 6-packs for a cake. But what that does tell you is that you want to plan aisle widths so that the guy working here and the guy working here are not interfering with each other.
Oh, they're
You look
rubbing
at the
butts.
aisle widths on the other side, you're only working in one direction. That's a monodirectional scene over here. So they can be narrower, because you're only paying attention to this direction. You're not doing anything over here.
Correct.
So you could, so steal that.
Mm-hmm.
Pitfall. Here we go. Another pitfall. If you want to replicate this in HO, you're not going to save a lot of space, and I'll tell you why. Because in HO, you'll save, let's just say it's halfway, which it really isn't. We won't get into scale reductions and stuff like that. We could replicate this in half this width, but we can't replicate this. This part doesn't scale.
Right.
We can do the same thing over on the other side, but the problem is this.
We still need the same
Because
width.
dimensions are defined by your aisles and your fattest operator or owner, right? This radius behind us is going to probably be pretty close to the same in HO or N or O, because what you're doing is you are spanning clearance for this aisle and this aisle. So
Right.
the aisle is actually going to be the one, the part that
One of it,
doesn't scale, that
right.
dictates
Some
how
of your
far you can compress a plan, or if you can steal a plan of somebody's that was drawn in N and try and build it in O. There's just all kinds of dimensional things you have to think about
right.
as you
right.
turn around and redevelop it. Not the least of which, again, is reach. Here's a pitfall. How do you deal with this one? You obviously you're radiusing here. It's the corner pitfall. This is a classic.
Oh yeah.
How do you?
Yeah.
How am I going to build this?
Yeah. Exactly.
You know. Obviously you don't want a siding back there.
Right.
You don't want anything you want to work with. This has got to be basically purely scenic.
Yes.
And actually, this whole section here, this lump, this hill, was built off layout.
Okay. Right.
Completely built off layout, shoved in place, and then the area where there actually was the joint is finished to turn around and match the scenery and the buildings and everything like that. This
Right.
thing was completely built off layout because this obviously is a problem.
Yes. Yeah.
The same thing. There's another one that's over here, but you'll see them.
It's the
By the
same.
way, there's a hell of a lot fewer of these in nodal design than there is in linear design, because you can just ignore the corner and just in nodal design and just throw up that black curtain that we saw on the that we
Just
saw
yeah.
earlier,
Right.
and not even have to bother with it. So I don't have to worry about this because my scene is this diorama.
Right.
Right? Still, I have this problem in here. But again, I have the same sort of thing. So you got to be careful about where your track arrangements are,
Correct. Yeah.
and and know that this radius of reach, right? You're standing in the corner, and it's a radius of reach here.
Mm-hmm. I have that issue in my layout. In Gettysburg, the town extends way back, like almost 5 feet, and I have a difficult time just getting back there. And there's one critical switch that's just within reach. And if I had it to do again, that would have never have
How many
happened.
times have I heard if I had thought about that?
Yeah. Yep.
Here's something fun. Maybe fun, maybe not. When you're operating this is an ops platform again. So in every location when the track is here, I have found it helps people immensely to have model boards up.
Right.
It tells them all the names of all the tracks. It tells them the places where the toggles will turn things on and off. That is basically is a symbol that says that this is an area of trackage that can be turned off from the next or isolated. That also will correlate down on the trackage itself, because I'll also paint the joiners for people to see, so that they can see where blocks happen, where isolated sections are, so that they can.
And it's been
they can-
very helpful. We're first
My
operating.
place names are all, because we change scenarios and change places all the time. They come off
Mm-hmm.
and get replaced with different place names when we run a different scenario.
Right.
So everything that's on the paperwork correlates with what's on the puzzle boards, the model boards, depending on what language you speak. And get on there. There you go. So everything's coordinating with the paperwork.
Yeah.
It's just it makes life easier. Again, we're looking at places where you want phone poles, trees, that sort of thing. You got to mind that you still have got the room to work.
Right. Need to be able to reach the switches. Right.
Reliability. Quite often, simple is better.
The KISS principle. Yes.
Yeah.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Well, there are arguments about what the translation really is.